What if I told you that corporations weren't always the unstoppable giants they are today? That there was a time when American corporations had expiration dates, couldn't own other companies, and could be dissolved by the state if they harmed the public good. This isn't some alternate reality. This was America. And the story of how we got from there to here is one of the most consequential transformations in our nation's history. Welcome to Forgotten Finance, where lost money lessons come back to life. Picture this. It's 1800. You're an entrepreneur in early America with a brilliant idea. Maybe you want to build a canal, or start a textile mill, or establish a bank. But there's a problem. You can't just file some paperwork and start a corporation. You need permission from the state legislature. And they're going to interrogate you. The legislators will ask, does your business serve the public good? How long will it operate? What specific activities will it conduct? They'll write these limitations directly into your corporate charter, and if you step outside those boundaries, they can revoke your charter entirely and dissolve your company. Sound extreme? To the founding generation, this was common sense. See, Americans in the early republic had witnessed the British East India Company, a corporation so powerful it had its own army, ruled over millions in India, and wielded influence that rivaled governments. The Boston Tea Party wasn't just about taxation. It was a revolt against corporate monopoly power. Those tea leaves floating in Boston Harbor were owned by the East India Company, which had been granted exclusive rights to sell tea in the colonies. The founders looked at that and said, never again. Thomas Jefferson warned that corporations should be subject to the law and only the law. Many states wrote into their constitutions explicit restrictions on corporate power. In Pennsylvania, the 1776 Constitution stated that the accumulation of property and wealth in the hands of the few was dangerous to the rights and destructive of the common happiness. Early corporate charters came with hard limits. They typically lasted 20 to 30 years, then expired. Corporations couldn't own stock in other corporations. No conglomerates allowed. They couldn't operate outside their home state. They couldn't engage in any business activity not explicitly spelled out in their charter. And here's the kicker. Shareholders could be held personally liable for corporate debts and crimes. This wasn't theoretical. States regularly revoked corporate charters. In 1825, Pennsylvania revoked the charter of an insurance company for failing to serve the public interest. Between 1790 and 1860, several states dissolved banks for violating their charters. The message was clear. Corporations existed at the pleasure of the people, not the other way around. But then something changed, and it started where so many American stories do, with a railroad. The mid-1800s saw an explosion of railroad construction. These were massive undertakings requiring enormous capital. The old restrictive charter system couldn't keep up. States began competing to attract railroad companies, loosening their regulations. New Jersey and Delaware led the race to the bottom, offering what were essentially charter shopping opportunities. Then came the Civil War. The federal government partnered with corporations on an unprecedented scale to fuel the war effort. After the war, these same corporations turned their attention to westward expansion and industrialization. They had tasted power and wanted more. The turning point came in 1886 with a Supreme Court case called Santa Clara County versus Southern Pacific Railroad. In the official court reporter's headnote, not even in the actual legal opinion, corporations were recognized as persons under the 14th Amendment. This amendment, passed to protect freed slaves, was now being used to shield corporations from regulation. Let that sink in. An amendment written to ensure human rights after slavery was repurposed to give corporations constitutional protections. But the real architect of corporate power was a man you've probably never heard of, James B. Dill. He was the mastermind behind New Jersey's 1896 corporate law reforms, which allowed corporations to own other corporations, effectively legalizing the trust and the holding company. Dill called it the little state with the big conscience. Others called it the beginning of monopoly capitalism. Within years, Standard Oil, U.S. Steel, and a wave of megacorporations reorganized under New Jersey law. By 1901, two-thirds of corporations with over $10 million in capital were incorporated in New Jersey. The state was making so much money from incorporation fees that it eliminated property taxes for residents. Delaware saw the opportunity and went even further, passing laws in 1899 and 1915 that were even more corporation-friendly. Today, more than 60% of Fortune 500 companies are incorporated in Delaware, even though most don't operate there. So what happened when we unchained corporate power? The Gilded Age and Progressive Era saw inequality explode. By 1890, the richest 1% of Americans owned 51% of all wealth. Monopolies controlled entire industries. Workers, including children, labored in dangerous conditions for poverty wages. Company towns trapped workers in debt. Corporate money corrupted politics openly. Senators were literally bought and paid for before the 17th Amendment established direct election. There was pushback. The Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890, the Clayton Act of 1914, the creation of the Federal Trade Commission, Teddy Roosevelt's trust busting. These weren't anti-business measures. They were attempts to restore the original American vision that corporations should serve the public, not rule it. But the pendulum kept swinging. The 1970s brought a new wave of deregulation and a shift in corporate purpose. In 1970, economist Milton Friedman published an essay arguing that a corporation's only social responsibility was to increase profits for shareholders. This wasn't traditional American thinking. It was revolutionary. But it became gospel. The 1980s saw merger mania and the rise of shareholder primacy. The 1990s brought financial deregulation. The 2000s saw corporations grow to unprecedented size. In 2010, Citizens United versus FEC ruled that corporate spending on political campaigns was protected speech, removing limits on corporate influence in elections. Today, the largest corporations have annual revenues exceeding the GDP of entire nations. Amazon's revenue surpasses the GDP of New Zealand. Apple has more cash reserves than the U.S. Treasury has on hand. The combined wealth of America's billionaires, built largely through corporations, exceeds $4 trillion. Here's what's haunting about this history. None of this was inevitable. The original American vision held that corporations were tools, created by the people, for the people, subject to strict democratic control. Corporations existed only because they served a public purpose, and the moment they stopped serving that purpose, they could be ended. We didn't lose that vision through some great battle or constitutional amendment. We lost it through 1,000 small surrenders. Court decisions that expanded corporate rights, state laws that relaxed corporate restrictions, and a cultural shift that made us forget we ever thought differently. The question isn't whether corporations are evil or good. The question is, who's in charge? Do corporations exist to serve society, or does society exist to serve corporations? Early Americans knew their answer. They had seen what happened when you gave a corporation too much power. They watched the East India Company's flag fly over nations. They weren't going to make that mistake. But somehow, we forgot. The good news? History isn't over. Every generation gets to decide what kind of economy it wants, what role corporations should play, and where power should reside. The tools that restrained corporate power once, charter revocations, strict regulations, antitrust enforcement, corporate taxes, still exist. We just have to remember they're ours to use. The story of corporate power in America isn't a story of progress or decline. It's a story of choices. And every day, we're still making them. If this forgotten history surprised you, hit that subscribe button, because we're digging up more lost money lessons every week. Drop a comment and tell me what shocked you most about corporate history. And if you want to dive deeper, check out the sources in the description. Until next time, remember, the best financial lessons are the ones we almost forgot.